All right, so we're going to start with Learning Guide 1, Properties of Angles and Triangles. This is for Math 20-2. In this first learning guide, what we're going to be doing is basically looking at lines and triangles and different shapes and trying to figure out missing angles, knowing some of the rules about those shapes. So we're going to be looking at parallel lines, which you can see is 2.1. So parallel lines we'll talk about. And then more specifically, we're going to talk about the angles formed by parallel lines. And if I know one of the angles, I will probably be able to solve for a whole bunch of other angles just by looking at some rules. So in speaking of these rules, let's talk first of all about parallel lines. Parallel lines are two lines in the same plane that will never, never, never intersect. So you can think of like a railway track or think about the sides of a road. They're never going to intersect. They run the same distance apart at any given point. So if I were to take a ruler and measure the distance here and measure the distance here, it's going to be exactly the same. A transversal is where we're going to come into creating our angles. So basically a transversal is a line that crosses at least two other lines at distinct points. So if you look at this diagram, I've got two parallel lines right here, and I've drawn a transversal. So basically a line that's going to intersect both of those lines. And I just wrote on the side there, do you see any angles that are created? Well, if you look, we've got an angle here. We've got an angle here, here, here. So you can see I've just created 8 different angles. And what we're going to talk about in this lesson is what the relationship is between all of those angles. So the first one, it's saying when a transversal intersects parallel lines, it creates angles that have a special relationship. These relationships can help us to solve for missing angles. If I look at the first one, it's called the interior angles rule. It's saying the angles formed by a transversal, so remember transversal is our line that intersects our parallel lines. It's saying that the angles formed by a transversal and parallel lines that lie inside the parallel lines. So the interior angles are going to be these guys in here. So see how they're inside. So C, D, and E, and F. So C, D, E, and F. Now, if I look to see, okay, well, what is the relationship between those guys? I've kind of labeled this a little bit funny. I've called it the Z rule. And the reason I've done that, just because we all know what the letter Z looks like, and we can kind of find a Z within our parallel lines and that transversal. So if you take a look at this guy here, hopefully you can kind of see the letter Z there. And according to this alternate interior angles rule, or the Z rule, I know automatically that C and F are the exact same angle. So I know that C is equal to F. On the flip side of that, I can still look for a Z, but this one is going to kind of be a backward Z. So this, this, and this. That tells me I know that D and E are going to be exactly the same. So D and E. So what I mean by this, guys, is let's say D I'm given as 100 degrees. Well, if D is 100 degrees, right away I know that angle E also has to be 100 degrees. One thing, again, remember, what is the point of this learning guide? What are we going to be doing? We're solving for the missing angles. Something else that I want you to consider is that we actually have enough information to solve pretty much for all of these. I'm just going to focus on the interior for right now, but I have the opportunity right now to solve for C and F. What I want you guys to look at as well is that I have a straight line here. Now remember back a long time ago in junior high, you would have learned that the whole angle of a straight line is 180 degrees. Just like if I were to have a 90-degree angle, okay, I know all the angles are going to add up to 90. If I have a circle, I know that all the angles are going to add up to 360. So that's kind of common knowledge that you're bringing into the course. So if this angle here is a straight line, I know that this plus this has to equal 180 degrees. So guys, if I already know that this is 100, then this angle C would have to be 180 minus 100, which would be 80 degrees. And if I know that C is equal to 80 degrees, then I also know, according to the Z rule, that F is also going to be 80 degrees. So again, this is just kind of a taste of what we're going to get into. So right away, you want to know the Z rule. Okay, so I know that the alternate interior angles are going to be the same. Let's take a look at another one. The exterior angles. So first of all, what is that? Those are the angles formed by a transversal. So remember that blue line there, and parallel lines that lie outside the parallel lines. Outside the parallel lines, now I'm looking for A and B and G and H. So A, B, G, and H. Let's take a look at this rule here. It's called the alternate exterior angles, or as a simpler way of looking at it, the double Y rule. Now you kind of have to use your imagination here for a double Y, but we all know what a Y looks like. Okay, so we're going to look for a Y in our parallel lines and transversal. So kind of follow along with me here. Everybody kind of see that Y there? And a double Y means that I've got, so this angle A, and the other Y is going to be right here. So double Y. That tells us that A is going to be equal to H. On the flip side of that, if I reverse it, I've got this angle, or this Y here, all the way down, is going to be opposite to this one. So I know that B and G are going to be the same. So again, if I put that into, okay, well, what kind of questions are we going to be asked? Well, let's say that B is equal to 90, no, let's just make it 80 degrees again. We'll just do it nice and easy. If B is equal to 80 degrees, then right away I know G is equal to 80 degrees. I could also solve for H and A because, if you guys can take a look here, this again is a straight line. So I know that if G is 80, H must be 100 because 80 and 100 is 180. If H is 100, that means A would also have to be 100 degrees. Okay, let's look at the next one. Corresponding angles. This is saying one interior angle, so that's the inside angle, interior, and one exterior, so remember that's the outside angle, that are non-adjacent. So that means that they're not touching. And on the same side of a transversal. So one interior angle and one exterior angle. So an example of that could be like this. So one interior angle and one exterior angle. So they're not touching one another, so it can't be B and D, but they're on the same side of the transversal. So we can see it's D and H would again be an example of corresponding angles. So we can label all of these. I know that I would have A and E. So A and E. I know we would have B and F. So B and F. We've already talked about D and H. And then obviously it would be C and G. So those are kind of the pairs of corresponding angles. Now this one's kind of cool. Again, you can look for letters that tell us what angles are going to be exactly the same. So if I look at this one, we say corresponding angles, or as I like to call it, the F rule. So if you look for an F somewhere in these parallel lines, you can kind of see one right here. So with that F, I've got the angle D and I've got angle H. So that tells me right away that D and H are going to be exactly the same according to this F rule, or better termed as corresponding angles rule. Let's look for another F. Do this in a different color. Maybe let's take that F and we'll turn it backwards. So if you can see that F, right away we know that C and G are corresponding equal angles. So I can say C is going to be equal to G. Now I can take that F and I can turn it upside down. So I'm going to take my red F and I'm going to flip it upside down here. So that tells us F and B are going to be the same angle. So F and B. And then the last one would be upside down and backwards. So now we're looking here, and that will allow you to see that A and E are exactly the same. Okay? So again, what's the point of doing all this? What kind of questions we're going to be getting is you're going to have to be applying all of these rules in order to solve for these missing angles. One other observation that I just want to make a note of, this isn't in your notes, so you might want to write this down. Corresponding interior angles are supplementary. Now, supplementary is a rule you may not remember. It actually means that we've got two angles that add to 180. So angles that add to 180 degrees. Okay, so what does that mean? Corresponding interior angles. This is what I like to call the C rule. Some more letters. So the C rule, if you guys can imagine the little letter C right here. Now, normally when I do these letters, it means that the angles are going to be exactly the same. In this case, they're not the same with the C rule. They're what's called supplementary. So that means that angle D plus angle F is equal to 180. So D plus F is going to be equal to 180. And obviously, well, hopefully you can see the other C, which would just be a backward C, and that's going to be C plus E. So C plus E is going to be equal to 180 degrees. So that's something that might help, again, when you're just solving for those missing angles. What we're going to do now is actually apply these to a couple of questions. So apply these rules here. Oh, sorry, I missed one. Vertically opposite angles. We'll do this one first. This one is saying that angles that share the same place along the transversal sorry guys, technical difficulties. Vertically opposite angles are angles that share the same place along the transversal, but they are opposite. So vertically opposite angles would be, so an example would kind of be like A and D. So again, they are on the same place along the transversal, but they're opposite. So A and D would be an example here. We would have B and C would be an example. E and H would be an example. F and G would be another example. So if I take a look again at a letter that we can do here, last one, this is going to be vertically opposite angles, which would be the X rule. Now this one's actually really cool and really easy. Okay, if I take a look at my X here, right away, I know that the opposite angles are going to be exactly the same. And this is actually kind of cool. Even if you take a ruler and you draw one line and then you intersect it with another line, you will always, if you actually measure these angles, they're always going to be the same when they're opposite. And these ones are going to be the same. And again, the cool thing that we want to remember, I keep coming back to it because you guys are going to use it quite a bit when you're solving, is this is a straight line, which means that these two angles would be supplementary. So this plus this would be equal to 180 degrees. So don't forget to look for those straight lines. The next thing we want to do is look for all of these vertically opposite angles. So we know that A is going to be equal to D. We know that B is going to be equal to C. E is equal to H. And F is going to be equal to G. Okay, so you've got all of those letters, and now, like I was saying before, we're going to actually get into applying these. So types of questions that you're going to be seeing in this learning guide. This is an example of something that we're given parallel lines, we're given a transversal, and we're actually using numbers here, and we're going to need to be able to solve for the missing angles. So right away, you want to start off with things that you know. Now, first of all, when I look at this, I look up at that 140, and I see right away that B is opposite to 140. So I know automatically that B is going to be equal to 140 degrees. So we can put that right on our form here. Now, the other thing that we can identify, and I've kind of mentioned it a couple of times throughout this lesson, is that if we have a straight line, I know that all of the angles are going to add up to 180. So if I take a look just at this straight line, if I know that this is 140, I've got another little angle right there, which is A, and that together has to equal 180 degrees. So if I already know that this one is 140, then A has to be 180 minus 140. And that's going to give us 40 degrees. So we've got A equal to 40 degrees. So we can pop that right here. Now again, I always liked using those opposite angles because it's pretty obvious. So A, the opposite, is just going to be C. So we know C is also going to be 40 degrees. Now, guys, we can't use those opposite angles anymore. We can't use straight lines. Now is where we actually need to come into our letters. So like those Z rule and the F rule and the double Y rule. So again, if I just write in here what we've got, that's 140 degrees. That's 40, and this is 40. Now, whatever letter you want to use, you can use any one of them. Let's say you want to choose to use the Z rule. Well, the Z would look something like this. Okay, and remember I know that this angle and this angle are going to be the same. So right away I know that E has to be 140 degrees. That's one option. Let's say you didn't like the Z rule and you want to use maybe the F rule. Okay, let's say the F rule, I know that it's going to look kind of wonky, but it's going to be like this. I know if this is 40, then that means G also has to be 40 degrees. Okay. Again, that kind of goes along with the double Y rule. So I know if this is my Y, that's my opposite Y, and 40 and 40 makes sense. So there's lots and lots of options that you can use here, and they all should give you the same answer. So we know that this is 140, we know that this is 40, and then guys, nice and easy, we can just use that opposite angles again. So we know right away F and E are opposite, so I know F is going to be 140. And D and G are opposite, so we know that that is also going to be 40 degrees. One last example, and that will finish up this first lesson here. Again, this is an example of where we want to solve for these missing angles. So if you have no idea where to start, you just kind of take a look at the diagram and figure out, well, what do I see? I see two parallel lines. I've got one here and one here. And we've actually got two transversals. So we've got quite a few angles that we can actually identify and lots of rules here that we can use. So if we start up at the top, let's say this 55 degrees, I kind of think that this is the easiest one to see. Well, right away we know that D is an opposite angle. Okay, so we know right away that D is going to be equal to 55 degrees. One suggestion I would make when you're doing these, even in your textbook, I don't mind if you write in it, but just use pencil really lightly and then you can erase it after. It always makes it a little bit easier if you put in the angles once you find them. So let's say this is 55. Now hopefully what you guys can now see is the Z rule right here. This is 55, which means that F also has to be 55 degrees. Okay? Now, just like what we used before, if I know that F is 55, then automatically I know that B is going to be 55 degrees as well. Now, if we continue on, all of those 55s don't really help us anymore when I look over at that 112. With 112, we kind of need to use opposite angles, but we also could use our straight line. Remember what I was talking about? I keep mentioning it again and again. If I have a straight line, I know that all of my angles, this plus this, has to equal 180 degrees. So to find angle C here, what I would want to do is take 180 minus 112. And that's going to give us 68 degrees. So if we've got C to be 68, let's write that in. Now looking at these parallel lines here, again, I can bring in all these different letters that we've been using. And again, there's a whole bunch of ways that we could do this, but one of probably the quickest ways is using the upside down F. Okay, so if I know that's 112, then right away I know that A is also going to be 112 degrees. Again, because of that upside down F. And then that's 112. Then our opposite angle is also going to be 112 degrees. Okay. So guys, now it's time to practice. So please, please, please make sure that you go into your textbook and you try page 72 and page 78. After you've done those questions, if you don't have any, questions with them, no problems, move on to your assignment and you can start doing 3 questions on your assignment. So number 1, 2, 4. Please make sure you're taking notes on these notes, and also make sure that you come and see me at the help desk to go over anything that's kind of not making sense. And then make sure that you're continuing to catch up as quick as you can.